Yeah, no, but welcome back, guys. Today we're talking about imposter syndrome. And first, I think I've talked to a couple folks who don't know what it is. So maybe
Mhm.
we can take a little bit of time to define it, talk about what it actually is, and then we talk about how it manifests, right? How it actually shows up, and what some things people can tend to look at and see about themselves that might be holding them back that may not even know about. Imposter syndrome typically is it's at its core, it's about confidence, right? It's about your identity and how you identify with what your role is, what your perceived role is, right? So, for example, someone who's new to a role, or a new manager, a new leader of some sort, they might not feel aligned with that role yet. And even if they've been in that role for a long time, they might be like, "Oh, it's a matter of time before people figure out that I don't know what I'm doing, right? Or that I'm a fraud, or that I'm just not as good. I don't want people to find out, so I got to do extra work to do that, to make sure that I'm not looked upon as being what I am, which is a fraud." In reality situation, most times that's not true, right? Most times some of the highest achievers feel like they're frauds, feel like they're not that great at what they do, and they're worried about how people perceive them. And that can hold people back. It does hold people back in a lot of ways.
Because the people who come to me with imposter syndrome, or who at least admit it to me, let's put it that way, overwhelmingly are women. And so I was just wondering, were these people both men and women?
Yeah, both men and women, and that I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a really big perception that it's mostly dealt with by women, and that's not true at all. Actually, women talk about it more.
Mhm.
Men internalize it more. So it's actually pretty equal in terms of folks I've talked to who have it and who deal with it and who suffer through it, and struggle with it. But the fact of the matter, there's more. I don't know if I don't want to say if it's more prevalent, but it's more talked about in the female community, right? Like, women are able to talk about it with one another a lot more. Guys
We
don't
can
sit
be
together like, "Yo, man, I feel
vulnerable
like..."
about it.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay for women to be more vulnerable about it than men, right? Men, I mean, there's this
Absolutely.
perception that men can't share their emotions, or they're not supposed to share their emotions. And so as a result, you have a lot of guys who are dealing with this and just not able to talk about it with anyone, and not able to confide in anyone about it. So yeah, to your point, it's both men and women.
At the core, it's about confidence. And you mentioned something related to a profession, but it really doesn't matter. Think about new parents and what stress, anxiety, frustration. I mean, the number one thing you always hear is that why doesn't parenthood come with a manual, right? And so this really is about any role we step into where we feel like we've not fully felt comfortable with that role. And that's going to be true for everything, right? Every time we step up into something new, we need to grow into it, but sometimes we never seem to get beyond it. You know, it may be right in the beginning, as you said, with the new manager, but oftentimes the people that I'm talking to, they've been feeling this way for years, especially senior level managers are the people that I hear this from. Like I said, a lot of them from women. And what they think, because I was in that place as well, what they think is if I get the next training, the next certification, the next degree, somehow or the other, magically, I'm going to start getting confidence in myself. And that is not the key, right? I mean, it does the opposite, because now on paper, you're even more qualified, right?
Yep.
And you feel even worse about yourself.
Imposter syndrome is not about external validation at all, because ultimately you get the external validation. People are coming to you, they're looking at you as that professional, as that expert in your field or whatever. They're already looking at you that way. But that doesn't matter to you. It's not something that registers to you. So you're already getting the external validation, but you need it universally. And that's just not reality. Ultimately, you need your own validation, the internal validation you're not giving yourself. You have to realign your identities in that way, so that you're actually looking at yourself that way first, before anyone else does.
But I've told a lot of young women, don't rush out and do your master's or whatever that next certification or degree is until you get really comfortable and work on the internal stuff. Because what's going to happen is you're going to come out of there with high expectations, but you're going to still have that same old mindset. And if that's going to be the case, you're going to be very disappointed and then feel stuck. Because now, like I said, you're even more qualified. So you should be feeling even better about yourself, but instead we end up feeling worse about ourselves.
Yeah, no, and that's 100% true. I mean, it's ultimately, you're putting more pressure on yourself, and you're furthering that that external opinion of everybody could have of you, and you're putting more pressure on yourself to be like, oh, well, I have to live up to this extra stuff,
Yes.
and it's just not the way it goes. Like you have to, like you said, you have to fill that gap inside of yourself first before anyone else can fill it for you. The one of the problems is people tend to, in general, we try to find validation externally, whether you're in a relationship, whether you're at a job, whether you have a business, whether you're just existing with your friends. You want to be accepted, you want to be validated, you want to get lots of other stuff from the external people, and then you blame them for not giving it to you, right? And ultimately, you have to do it for yourself first, and if you don't do it for yourself, no one's going to believe you when you say that you're a thing. And if you operate at a certain frequency, and that frequency is being held back by whatever your beliefs about yourself are, your limiting beliefs, then you're only going to go so far. You're only going to go as far as you let yourself go. And you mentioned something about self-sabotage, which I want to address, and this is where I have a controversial opinion. It's actually controversial. I don't think there's such thing as self-sabotage, and I think you would actually agree with the way I explain this, because self-sabotage, at its core, is really your immature version of yourself trying to take care of you the best it knows how, and it doesn't actually know how to do that. So it tells you and holds you back from doing something that it could perceive as scary, dangerous, or risky, right? So it's like, oh, don't do that because you might get in trouble. You might fail at that. It makes it not okay to fail, or not okay to do something that you probably know how to do or could do if you've never done it before, right? But it's trying to take care of you the best it knows how. And how does it know how to do that? It knows how to do that based on its own experience, which is very, very limited, right? It's that base version of you that's from 5 or 10 years old, or whatever period of time, whatever immature version of yourself is trying to give you advice as a 35, 45, 55, 65 years old person. But in terms of subconscious, your subconscious knows a lot more than you let it give it credit for. And we don't do that. We don't tap into that as much. We tend to hold ourselves back actively because we're trying to protect ourselves, when in reality, we're just holding ourselves back. Our subconscious is kind of just does whatever it does, right? It does these really interesting things, and it can really influence how we behave without us even realizing it.
And so if you have people who are going through imposter syndrome, how about just stopping and asking yourself, oh, what would life look like if I really was as good as other people say I am, or I'm really good as what I think I can be? Instead of allowing the subconscious to just keep throwing up one negative after another, turn that around and see what the positive side of that would be, because that might be a good vision to attain for.
Yeah, no, and that's the other part of it too, is fear of failure is not just fear of failure by itself, right? Failure by itself just doesn't mean anything. And we don't associate, think about a kid before you put any pressure on them about grades, about success, about any of that kind of stuff. Do they care if they fall? Do they care if they trip and if they drop the ball, if something doesn't happen? No, but they care about the impact of that thing. They care about the meaning around that they're making out of that, right? But what are the repercussions if I fail? It's that means I'm wrong. That means I was wrong. That means I made the wrong choice. That means I got to deal with everyone else around me talking about how much I messed up. That means I'm going to be embarrassed. People will judge me. These are all things that don't actually associate with failure directly. Failure is not a thing by itself, right? It's just something that happens or doesn't happen, right? And so everything is about stories. Imposter syndrome, even itself, is about a story. It's a story, a collection of stories, and the impact of that is also a story. And so, as you're dealing with folks who like that, I think that's one of the strengths that coaches have. To your point, is no human is purely unbiased. Let's start with that, right? We all have some biases here and there, whether we want to or not. But coaches are trained in being relatively objective, as objective as we can be, right? Taking that step back and looking at the situation and saying, look, I'm not going to advise you one way or another because it's not about me, it's about you, right? What's the right way to go? You know that for you. I can tell you, hey, here's going to be the impacts, some impacts of this choice, and here's some impacts of this choice, right? And these are the choices you have in front of you. Ultimately, you got to step through that. And I'll do a Matrix reference now because
I did watch that one.
Wow, well done. All right, cool. There we go. Cool. So there's a scene in there where Morpheus tells Neo, I can only show you the door. You have to open it. That is directly out of a lot of religious texts. But secondly, it's also a coaching thing, right? We can only show you the different doors you have in front of you and tell you maybe the benefits and pitfalls of each one of them. Some of them, the ones we're aware of, but you ultimately have the choice to do that, right? And that's the same thing with imposter syndrome. You have to understand what your options are in front of you, what the real impacts, not just perceived impacts of those things are, because perception is not true reality. True reality is, there's another conversation whether that exists or not. But there's a perception that we create about things that makes things worse or better than they actually are. And our job is to try to help you focus on what not the perceived reactions of things are, perceived impacts, but what the actual impacts could be. And it reminds me of the coaching idea of the thinking path. And it's where it's like, so on the one side, you have ultimately one result, right? Right now you have these beliefs or thoughts over here. And then you have underneath that influences your actions. And the actions get you a certain result, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's over here. That's the current state right here. And then you want to go over here. You want this different result than you get right now. Right now, you're getting this result here. You want to get this result over here. Now, to do that, you got to change your beliefs or your actions. Most people just change the actions and then hope that the beliefs catch up. That happens after a while, maybe. But ultimately, the best way to do that, to really change the result in a more permanent and consistent way, is to change the beliefs and thoughts that influence the actions. Because then there's no prescriptive action you have to take. You'll automatically be taking the right action no matter what happens, because you have the beliefs to support that action. And then the results are going to change automatically, right? And that's where you can take authentic, intentional action, as opposed to just saying, tell me what to do. And someone tells you what to do and you do what's authentic for them. Maybe you get the result, maybe you don't.
But let me ask you this question. So you had a few conversations with people related to fear of feeling like a fraud. So what are some of your suggestions? What could you give some of our listeners as tips for them to kind of consider?
Well, a couple of different things. I mean, I'll start by saying there's not one approach that works for everyone, because again, authenticity is the ultimate thing, right? But a couple of questions that I would ask them. One is, I think this is probably the most common one, is what's on the other side of the fear, right? What's on the other side of that fear for you? And identifying, one, where the fear is coming from. What are they actually afraid of? Because fear of failure, like I said, is not a thing. It's the impact that they perceive will happen if they fail. That's the one thing. But what's on the other side of failure is other consideration. And then the other thing is just talking about what's happened in their past, like really delving into their past in terms of what they've experienced in the past that make them feel this way or make them believe this about themselves, right? And allowing them to create some habits for themselves, because it's not something you solve in one conversation, right? But allowing them to create habits for themselves to remind themselves of their own qualifications, of their own ability to do what they're doing, of not qualifications in terms of certifications. I don't mean paper. I mean actual actions and results, right? Who have they been able to work with? What have they been able to do and accomplish in their lives, professionally, personally, otherwise? Wherever they're feeling this stuckness or this fear, this imposter syndrome, we delve into that part of their lives and find opportunities, find situations where they've been successful, where they didn't think that they might have been, where they've actually proven the opposite of what they're afraid of, and really remind themselves of that on a regular basis, so that then they can actually move forward and say to themselves, hey, this is actually not really founded in anything.